Episode 20 to 21, Indelible Sin, Where Feelings Go. So, with our assessment of Rin concluded, let's look back at the rest of the Kaide arc. We've gone through our exploration of Kaide, Rin, in episodes 18 to 19, so most of the legwork here is done. Let's start picking out a few choice scenes to break down the rest of the story. First, we have a scene a couple of minutes into episode 20. After episode 19's conclusion, we pick back up with Rin in the hospital waiting room with best girl Amma. He heads home and withdraws to his room where our object of discourse takes place. The scene itself is shot by now in classic shuffle fashion. The camera stays fixed as though it were a CCTV angle, perched to one of the box room's walls. The lighting of the shot is once more used to great effect as well. Rin is basked only in a small modicum of dusk light, while Kaide is enshrouded in, well, the dark. The point being that Kaide has created such a gap between them that even if she could get close to Rin, there's no light for him left to give her anymore. He's no longer a source of hope for her. She paces forward painfully towards him, closing the distance in a rather deliberately uneasy method, before we once again get to see the use of a close-up that obscures the eyes. As we've mentioned a few times now, this is done to illustrate when a character's words don't match their meaning, but they are technically speaking the truth. Kaide's eyes are off-screen here, as she tells Rin he cares too much for the others and ignores his own problems. It's a great use of irony, as while what she's saying isn't necessarily untrue, it implies far more to herself at this stage than it does to Rin. Kaide finishes and leaves the room, walking back into the dark of the hallway. Meanwhile, the close-up of Rin's shows that they've slowly made his visage darker throughout the scene, indicative of how Kaide's comments have pushed the two even further away from each other. To finish with a rather obvious but bit of symbolism, as she exits the room, she slams the door shut to Rin's bedroom, quite literally shutting herself on the side of isolation and completing the wall between the two of them. As we've been talking about, Rin's reaction to this is important. He gets a flashback to Issei's line, as mentioned above, leaves the house and assaults a lamppost years before Toradora made lamppost cruelty fashionable. He's once more made the same mistake. By continuing to treat Kaide like his surrogate wife while running off to date Asa, he's once more fucked it up. But that's not what's important for us. What matters is he realizes it. Because Asa's been temporarily immobilized, this time it's on him to accept it, and this time it's on him to come up with his own solution. Brilliant. The next thing to go over mirrors the last, but with some key differences. This time Primula enters Kaide's room, which is pitch black. Furthermore, the camera now seems fixed to the ceiling, as though we're not just literally looking down on Kaide, but figuratively, she's a lesser person. With Rin, we look at his room from an eye-level view, like an onlooker, but in Kaide's room, it's as though we're judging her from above. Primula is holding the cat plushie given to her from Rin, and unlike Kaide, her eyes are visible, further differentiating herself. She spits some pure truth bombs in classic deadpan Loli fashion, explaining to Kaide how in truth her seemingly selfish action in caring for Rin was really driven by a selfish desire to be with him. In this, we come back to our analysis of Kaide, as Primula helps us to understand how Kaide and Rin both truly are, as Rin will soon admit, dependency syndrome. Usually works both ways in some senses, and that's what's happening here, as Primula puts it down. They need each other, and yet at the same time, they are completely toxic for each other. Primula goes on to demand Kaide confesses her true feelings for Rin, to which she refuses, saying she's lost the right to do so, and that's what she's now going to lose Rin for good. Rimu's response is a simple one. She stands there in the pitch darkness in front of her crying, broken mother figure, and asks, "What about me?" All while holding a cat plushie, reminding us of her status as a stand-in child. As I've already gone over, in the midst of Kaide's arcs, we have a subplot story about child neglect, but initially we can take that statement two ways. Well, three if you include how darn heartbreaking it is. On the one hand, she's quite clearly saying she doesn't want to lose Rin either, as even if she's confused on whether to see him as a family or an interest of a romantic nature, you can also see it as her trying in her own unique way to comfort Kaide. Despite her seemingly harsh words up to this point, Primula is metaphorically offering a handout to Kaide, to stand by her. This is what makes the scene so brilliant. Without Primula, Kaide really would be alone, her worst fears realised, but in a sense her neglect of Primula is Primula's own worst fear. The point being that the two come to rely on one another, as we will soon see, as sisters, rather than the warped idea of family that they've had up till now. This scene is the beginning of them treating each other as equals rather than parent and guardian. Or guardian and child. Like Licorice and Kikyo, it's not solely Rin who saves Kaide. In fact, I'd argue without Primula, Kaide could well have become the true Yandere, and we could have ended up on a bad route for sure. Continuing on with this subplot of child neglect, we have the episode's final scene. Like episode 19, it's a pretty darn packed one, though less vital. What is important in it is Primula and Rin. Rin announces independency from the free state of Fuyo, causing Kaide to hit an even lower rock bottom than before. However, in the background of this affair is Primula. She's quite literally shot out of focus. After all, she's not what's important here. Her story ended 5 episodes ago. She can be put back in the box of characters. And in doing so, we get another amazingly great example of the anime embodying the story. Like the examples I mentioned earlier on, the focus is literally being taken away from Primula. Her relevance in the scene feels like an afterthought. Just like just like how Rin and Kaide, she's just kind of there, like a piece of furniture, like the ghost from the earlier episode. That's not to say there isn't still some details to be gleaned from the moment, as the camera does zoom in on her. Just her hands, just for a few seconds. Here we see 2 things: a towel which she promptly drops as it slips from her grasp, while overhearing the conversation, and the fact she's in pajamas. What this tells us is a lot about her growth as a character. This isn't the Primula from episode 2 anymore, the emotionless, half-alive little girl. No, she's become more of a considerate person. Her clothing tells us she'd probably already gone to bed, but couldn't sleep worrying about Rin's plus Kaide. And the towel rather more apparently shows how she's become more considerate, realising Rin has been in the rain umbrella-less. It's super short and simple of a scene, but exceedingly meaningful. And again, I love the way animation and shot composition are working together to greatly neglect Primula on an almost meta level. To go further, I also appreciate how Primula doesn't run off in tears like you might expect a normal child in other anime. It's another case of Shuffle sticking to its own rules, as it would be strange for Primula to act in that way. Instead, it's a far more happy with its subtle details, as mentioned. Finally, we get a continuation of the next time changing to match the situation, with the prior episodes like Kaide monologuing with the final tagline from Rimu. This time, the whole entire next time is just a still, silent image. No voiceover, no visuals, nothing. The next times have become themselves a representation of Kaide's mind and her declining mental state. The next episode opens in a similar fashion to episode 10 and of course episode 13's House of Twilight, and right off the bat you have some noticeable differences. For one, another shuffling has occurred, with some simple stylistic choices and filters applied in order to give the show a washed out, hazy, almost melancholy feel to it. It's done, I would think, rather simply, yet it has the effect of adding a whole new other colour palette to the show. Not for the first time, and it's one of the great additions to the visual appeal. It's not quite inverted, but gives a similar effect to that, which, as mentioned, I love this form of using the animation in suggestive ways to tell the story without words. It's an exceedingly hard effect to replicate this well in live action, but for anime it's almost the ultimate form of show don't tell, which can often be something the visual mediums struggle with to a surprising degree. Following this, we have another great moment. It's not that outstanding of a scene compared to the others we talked, especially considering your attention is mostly still on the colour palette filter change. But the significance of the scene is what makes it work so well. We have Rin, Sia, and Narane in the park. The same one from episode 13, where we witness Asa guide Rin in his more dramatic moment of need, and where Kyokyo led Rin in episode 17. The trio sit on what is presumably the same bench as the aforementioned Asa scene. And really, all Rin does is vent to the 2 otherworlders. The scene in itself is a subversion. Far too often I've made the adage that the inclusion of the 2 girls indicates the intentions of a scene being fantastical. But here we go back on that a little. Nara and CNA have developed. They've begun to move on with their lives, and while they're still interested in pursuing Rin, now it's for their own reasons and not due to survivor's guilt or a lack of self-worth. As such, you expect this scene to be the 2 of them talking Rin into the right path like Asa did prior. But you know what? They don't. Sure, they mirror episode 13 and that they sit quietly and listen to his grievances, but this time Rin finds the answers by himself. What he realises in this conversation is a really lovely message too. It isn't harsh or cruel in spite of all Kaide's done, but instead it's simply honest, maybe even a little self-deprecating. We were mistaking comfort for happiness. I love this line so much. It's quaint, not dramatic. And while I do love a dramatic scene with the MC crying as he runs to find the heroine in the final act, To me, this is perfect for the story Shuffle wants to tell. Here Rin admits his faults. It's not Asa or Kaede pointing them out. He's admitting that he was living a life as it was living life as it came to him, via the path of least resistance. But the boy still isn't finished. He goes on to thank Sia and Narane, telling them that through their struggles, he was able to see himself, able to see what, like they are, to see that like them, he too, and Kaede, needed to move forward with their lives. As he draws the parallels to Sia and Narane's own struggles and needing to let go of their sisters, while Rin and Kaede need to let go of their shared past. He's learning from their mistakes and progression. This mirroring of arcs is not only justification for Nara and Sia to stick around in the story for the show's whole running time, but is also like a, shuffling of the seats. A final note is another small but appreciated detail. Like Kaede not having time to put her shoes on during the flashback sequence and the climax on the bridge due to the nature of her flight, at the end of this scene we see Rin murmuring about the high cost of rent in the city. Now, I'm confident an earlier version of Narane or Sia would have offered to pay the rent for him, or to get him a job in their mansions, or just straight up have offered him a home there, maybe even having some sort of comical struggle over the matter. But these versions of the two girls have moved far past that. They've developed to have more respect for both themselves and for what Rin's trying to do. And as such, they simply cheer him on in his endeavour, just like any supportive friend would do. They don't offer him money, they don't offer him a job, they just support him. And that's some pretty good progress in both their characters and a way of showing the more serious nature of the later writing. We have a couple smaller moments interlaced into the greater story. We have a scene of Kaede wandering, culminating with her on a high river bridge. Her attire is even more dreary than normal, with a darkened colour palette. Prior to this, we have Primula rushing to tell Rin and the others about how Kaede has gone missing. Immediately, her panicked attitude and demeanour, along with the framing of the whole episode, or even the whole arc, put two exceedingly unsettling thoughts into her mind. Is she going to attack Asa again? Or does she have something more self-destructive in mind? Cutting back to our bridge shot, we hear footsteps. There's both a wave of relief as we presume Rin has arrived, but also one of intense dread. On the one hand, we know she's probably safe from suicide now, but there's still the possibility she'll try and kill Rin. But then all those fears are dashed as we realise it isn't Rin. Part of what makes the reveal nice is how we as the audience expect it to be Rin, probably as much as Kaede does. That's how it's framed. Her mind is shattered, but it's doubtful she expects Asa any more than the rest of us do. With Asa now here, the two retreat to the side of the riverbank. Interestingly, this is another location we visited a few times. One notable occasion being when Rin rejects Kikyo here. Speaking of this scene, aside from being wonderfully mature for any anime, regardless of the harem tag, it also helps to heavily mirror Kaede's arc to the other girls, with Asa now taking on the big sister role that Kikyo and Licorice filled in earlier arcs. As Shuffle is a show with strong emphasis on the role of family within life, along with the significance of found family, I think it's only fitting how pivotal the three older characters are to the individual story arcs. That this scene also has some just gorgeous imagery and symbolism. Alongside the more saturated colouring of these moments, we have Kaede and Asa almost looking like they're dressed for a funeral, which is only emphasised by the flowers in Asa's hands, whose red colouring acts as the only real splash of flavouring on screen, making them pop and draw the eye, more so adding to the funeral imagery, which at first seems sad. However, the flowers act under three rather important and separate guises. For one, there's the literal meaning of them as an apology. Secondarily, they symbolise death. But of what? Well, in reality, while the whole scene conjures the thought of a sad funeral, really it's the end of Kaede's self-harming lifestyle and her movement into living for herself. As such, the flowers take on a third meaning, as a symbol of Asa congratulating Kaede on her potential to be a truly brilliant person, a gift from one best friend to another. I also love how large amounts of this conversation are done with little to no music whatsoever, with just the sounds of the pouring rain in the background, until Kaede says it. I wasn't good enough to make him love me. It's not that surprising. Some of the awful things I did shouldn't be forgiven. It was all I cared about. Everything I did was for Rin. It was the one thing I could do to try and make up for what I'd done. But then, after a while, I realised what I really wanted was for him to fall in love with me. I wasn't honest with myself. Everything I did was because I wanted to be with Rin. Really, I could just put in this whole conversation in here. And I don't really know how to express my love for it without incomprehensible gushing. For one, it's framing, where Rin realization and dedication are done in the sunlit of the picturesque park, surrounded by friends. Kaide's confession is on a windswept riverbank in the pouring rain, facing her romantic rival. Where Rin is looking to the future to try and make things better, Kaide is wallowing, drowning as it were in the past. This scene is truly heartbreaking as Kaide further breaks down, wishing to see him one last time just so she can keep on loving him. She pours out all her feelings here in an act that forever cements her as one of, if not the best, childhood friend character in this or any other medium, and I absolutely love it. Even as the scene goes on, there's still this lingering fear in your mind that Kaide will flip out and try to drown Asa or some such in the states, or as she states in classic Yandere, who's already gone over the edge fashion. It makes sense though. I can't blame Rin for choosing someone like you over someone like me. As she says it, the flowers fall from Asa's hand in a wonderfully animated fashion. The music changes and the tension goes. It's a full release. It's over. You realise that the show has no interest in spoiling everything with some shocking murder scene, like we talked about in our analysis of Kaide. Even after all this, at her lowest moment of all, there's still hope. Hope of retribution. So I guess it's your job to make him happy now. Good for you. And Asa, I know that you love him, but I'm so sorry. We move past this to watch the 4 other primary members of the group out searching for Kaide, unaware of her revelations, and break down into her best friend's arms. We get nice quick shots of Rin's centre walking down the roadway. It's framed very similarly to the flashback dreams, but with a square focus on just him, plus it's obviously the present day now. And there she is. He offers her a handkerchief and asks her if she's okay, and the two finally have a conversation. It's beautiful because really, this is their first genuine talk they've had in the whole show. No masks, hypocrisy, dramatic irony, or pretending to play house. Instead, they finally converse properly, with Rin demanding Kaide listen to him, proclaim his feelings for Asa, not out of malice, masochism, or cruelty, but so that she can understand that he still always loves her, that he'll always be grateful for the cushioned lifestyle she afforded him for years of his life, and that she has the opportunity to go forward and be so much more than just his Japanese housewife.
Now
hold on, that isn't fair. You need to hear this from me, right now and from no one else. Again, I could just copy and paste the whole conversation into here. Please don't love me. Please don't.
Sorry.
I don't know how I'm supposed to. I love you so much. Aside from some brilliant voice acting, the two hug, and this is to me the best Yandere resolution I've ever seen. And as the two walk away from one another, the episode still isn't finished just yet. I made stew because I figured you'd probably be cold and hungry, and stew's good for that. Okay, you make it better, but I want you to have some. We're going to talk about this a lot more as we finally reach our character analysis of Primula, but in this moment we watch as arriving home, Kaide finds Primula has made her stew and prepares her a towel. This is what I alluded to earlier. In this moment, Kaide realizes what Rin already has, that the world hasn't ended, that she isn't alone, but instead there are still people who love her. I especially like how this scene frames it to make Primula, in her more adult attire, appear to be taller than Kaide. After all, despite the neglect, Primula has kept growing as a person in all this time. Well, Kaide is just starting on that journey. In a way, what the 3 episodes that make up or form the main crux of her arc lead to isn't the amazing discourse between her and Asa or the hug from Rin. It's this moment here, quiet and short in her own home, like a certain relevant someone we know, where Kaide realizes how much more than just Rin she has to live for. And to me, that's incredibly wonderful. Shuffle may at times have to sideline some of its characters out of certain episodes, but right here in episode 21, we see the show give further closure to Narane and Sia, a new beginning for Primula, the final stepping stones to set up for Rin and Asa, plus the climax of Kaide's arc, and to me that's mega impressive. This episode ends, for the first time in a bit, not on a cliffhanger, but a reward. We see this in episode 17, where it ends in a reward for Sia, but here it's Rin's reward. In fact, as we'll soon address, almost all of episode 22 is. We get to watch Rin finally confess his feelings for Asa. I quite like how they're already dating at this point. Far too many anime make the consummation of the leads becoming boyfriend and girlfriend out to be some massive deal. But here, that's borderline breezed past off screen. We already mentioned the not so shallow allusions to this all the way back in episode 18. Because of this, the two confessing love for one another actually comes across as quite real, sincere even. The anime doesn't end with the two of them hook up, nor when they admit nor when they're convicted of the L word. No, instead, we truly understand what love means to these characters, whether it's Primula's cat dolls, Narane and Sia's need to love themselves, or Rin and Kaide's shared familial love. This confession is something we understand, and rather than that devaluing it, it makes it into something far more special, to me at least. There are some other nice details here. Also puts me out of a job by drawing the parallels between her dismissal of her mother and Kaide's abuse of Rin out to the audience, with Rin and her having a really open chat, which helps to further these two's believability as a real couple of real individuals in spite of their fictionality. Rin even admits to her how hard his past was, but how much you can endure for a family member you love. Furthermore, the shot composition is just lovely. It should be noted that after Rin and Kaide literally hug it out, the art style resumes usual business hours and goes back to normal. Also notice the time segment also returns to being the less stressful, on my heart, normal version. The episode is rounded out on this confession, and a truly classic anime kiss to rival even the greatest among its contemporaries. That'll do for this part, and my apologies if my delivery was a bit stilted this week. It's the first time I've recorded since Christmas, but I hope you enjoyed anyway, and the written version is always available via mail. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.